Welcome to Dark Knight Films Reviews and another special ranking video. Tonight we will be counting down our picks for the top 10 game shows. Now for this list, I will be joined by Buddy Campbell.
Yes, Matt and I decided to check out what our 5 would be before we moved forward with anything. So I picked my 5 picks, and Matt ended up picking his 5 picks.
And then we realized no picks in our top 5s overlapped. So we decided to merge our picks in an alternating style to come up with the final top 10.
Then with that being said, my number 5 pick is Password, which aired on CBS from 1961 to 1967 and ABC from 1971 to 1975. And it would have other titles such as Password Plus from 1979 to 1982. And all of these from 1961 to 1982 were hosted by its original host, Alan Ledden. And then there was Super Password from 1982 to 1989, which was hosted by Bert Convy. And then there was $1 Million Password, which aired on CBS from 2008 to 2009, hosted by Regis Philbin. And then in 2022, Password was revitalized again with actress Keke Palmer as the host. I really like the format of the show, with 2 teams, each consisting of 1 celebrity player and 1 actual contestant competing against each other, as a word is conveyed to the 1 player on each team and is shown on screen to the viewers. And then they try to give 1 word clues to the other player to try and get them to guess the correct answer. It was such an interesting show. But for me, Alan was my favorite of the hosts. His kind, almost fatherly presence really made him a unique and always respectable host, and he's the reason Password made my list.
My number 5 is Lingo. Lingo was done 4 times in the US. The first from 1987 to 1988, hosted by Michael Reagan and series creator Ralph Andrews. Then there was a 2002 to 2007 Game Show Network version hosted by Chuck Woolery. There was a 2011 version hosted by Bill Engvall. And there was a current version in 2023 hosted by RuPaul. But the one that I'm focusing on this top 10 list is the version hosted by Chuck Woolery. I just enjoyed the way that Chuck Woolery hosted this, and I like the variation on bingo being used as the word game setup for this. It's a very unique and fun show, and Chuck Woolery hosted it very entertainingly. I think the reason it only lasted 6 seasons was because it was on Game Show Network. I think the series would have lasted a lot longer had it aired on one of the major TV networks.
My number 4 is Jeopardy, which began as a daytime game show on NBC from 1964 to 1975, with Art Fleming as the host and Don Pardo as the announcer. Fleming would continue as host with the new announcer John Harlan from 1978 to 1979. In early 1984, Weird Al Yankovic did a parody of the song Jeopardy called I Lost on Jeopardy, which would feature both Art Fleming and Don Pardo. This revitalized Jeopardy in audiences' minds, and later in that same year, a new version of the show debuted, hosted by Alex Trebek with Johnny Gilbert as the announcer. This would become the version of the show that a lot of people were familiar with, as Trebek would become one of the most popular and beloved game show hosts ever due to this show. Trebek hosted until his death in 2021. Executive producer Mike Richards initially took over as the host, but this only lasted a week. He was replaced by former contestant Ken Jennings, and Jennings and Mayun Bialik would alternate, until eventually Jennings became the permanent host. The show was greatly designed, so it really doesn't matter who the host is, as long as they maintain that same question and answer format of this quiz show. And that is why it makes my list.
And at my number 4 is Deal or No Deal, which aired on NBC from 2005 to 2019 and was hosted by Howie Mandel. Now, I'm not a big fan of Howie Mandel as a host. But I like the structure of this game, which had contestants choosing from 26 briefcases ranging from 1 cent to $1 million. And it's just a really interesting thing. And then as the show progresses, you had a banker trying to offer the contestant a chance for a guaranteed offer of money to swap their cases. And it's just a fun game, in my opinion.
My number 3 is Hollywood Squares, a variation on tic-tac-toe using celebrities in boxes for the board. Hollywood Squares first aired on NBC in 1966 and continued airing all the way into 1980 with both daytime and nighttime syndicated versions, and was hosted by Peter Marshall. Following Marshall's retirement, the show has been revived twice since, in a version hosted by John Davidson from 1986 to 1989, and another hosted by Tom Bergeron from 1998 to 2004. But for me, Peter Marshall was and always will be the best host of this show. He just made it so fun, and his interactions with the celebrities was quite perfect. Hence the reason why it makes my list at number 3.
At my number 3, I have Family Feud, which originally aired on ABC and in syndication, as well as CBS. From 1976 until present day, it is still airing to this day. The 1976 to 1985 version was hosted by Richard Dawson. 87 through 94 was hosted by Ray Combs. A 1999 to 2002 version was hosted by Louis Anderson. A 2002 to 2006 variation was hosted by Richard Karn. A 2006 to 2010 edition was hosted by John O'Hurley. And in 2010 to present, it has been hosted by Steve Harvey. And I think this show is a great design, and it doesn't matter who's hosting it because of the design of the show. It is always entertaining, even though the best hosts were definitely Richard Dawson and Steve Harvey. But in my opinion, the best host of this show was, of course, Richard Dawson.
My number 2 is The Newlywed Game, which was hosted by Bob Eubanks and aired on ABC in syndication from 1966 to 1988. They attempted a new version in 1988 with Paul Rodriguez as the host, but it failed and only lasted 1 season. Then they attempted again with Gary Kroeger as the host in 1996, but the ratings were struggling so bad that they ended up bringing in Eubanks to take over, and he resumed as the host on this new series until 1999. A Game Show Network edition was hosted by Carney Wilson from 2009 to 2010. This version of the series also struggled, so again they brought back Eubanks for 2 special episodes to up the ratings. The last attempt to revitalize this series was with The View's Sherry Shepherd from 2010 to 2013. But for me, Bob Eubanks was and always will be the host of The Newlywed Game. Hence the reason why he basically hosted that show off and on from 1966 all the way to 2010. He was so smooth and natural. He always had fun with the contestants by using sly double entendre, but still kept it clean, like his famous catchphrase making whoopee, his euphemism for sexual intercourse. So much like many of my other picks, he is the reason that this makes my number 2.
For my number 2, I have Pressure Luck, which aired on CBS from 1983 to 1986 and was hosted by Peter Tamarkin with Rod Roddy as the announcer. But technically this show started in 1977 under the title Second Chance, which was hosted by Jim Peck and aired on ABC. Now, this one was different in the respect that it didn't have a whammy. Instead, it had a devil on the cycling board, and when contestants landed on the devil, it would remove their cash and prizes, of course, but there was no animation like with Pressure Luck and the Whammy. Now, there was a Game Show Network revival of this show called Whammy, which was hosted by Todd Newton with Gary Kroger as the announcer. And there was a 2019 version on ABC hosted by Elizabeth Banks. But for me, the only version that I enjoy, and that's the reason it's on this list, is the 83 to 86 version hosted by Peter Tomarken. Part of the novelty of that show and why I think it is such a great show is Peter Tomarken as the host, Rod Roddy as an announcer, and the whammies in it. The whole structure of the show is very cool, but it is the host and the announcer that make it unique and interesting for me and why it makes my list.
And my number one pick is Match Game, which originally ran on NBC as the Match Game from 1962 until 1969 with Gene Rayburn as the host. Rayburn would return in a restructured and reformatted version of the show in 1973 for CBS and would continue hosting the show until 1982. During this time, the show went by many different names, such as being called Match Game and the year it was being aired, as well as Match Game PM. A new version of the show was designed for the 1990 to 1991 season on ABC, but unfortunately Rayburn was replaced by Ross Schaefer as the host in this version. Then a 1998 to 1999 syndicated version aired, hosted by Michael Berger. And more recently, ABC attempted another revival for 2016 to 2021 with Alec Baldwin as the host, but this one was a failure as well. None of these versions of the show succeeded, in my opinion, due to the fact that Rayburn was the perfect host for this show. His fun relationship with the celebrity panelists, such as Richard Dawson, Brett Summers, Charles Nelson Riley, Betty White, and Fannie Flagg, was just excellent. His fill-in-the-blank delivery, most times involving a character named Old Man Periwinkle, were so hilarious due to his fun but almost perverted humor. It made him stand out. And like many of my picks on this list, he is the reason that Match Game is my number one.
And at my number one position is The Price is Right, which aired from 1972 to present and is still airing to this day on CBS. Now, there was a 1956 to 65 version of the show, which I am not focusing on. My focus on this number one spot is the 72 to present version, which was originally hosted by Bob Barker from 72 all the way to 2007 when Drew Carey took over and has been hosting ever since. Barker was accompanied by a series of announcers who would always do that famous catchphrase of "come on down," beginning with Johnny Olson, followed by Rod Roddy and Rich Fields. The current announcer is George Gray. Now, this show was more than just a game show. It had the item up for bid parts of it, which wasn't too exciting, but it led to the pricing games, which are the big part of this show that makes it special. And then you have the Showcase Showdown. But this is just such a unique design of a show, having all of the different pricing games that happen throughout it. And it makes this show consistently unique, and it never seems to get old, even with pricing games being reused throughout the series. Now, Bob Barker is my favorite of all time with this series, but Drew Carey did a pretty good job replacing him, and I can still watch either one on any repeats of this, and I'll watch the one in present, and I enjoy it as well. It's just because of the structure. It doesn't necessarily mean the host has to be the key part of it. The show is strong because of its full structure, and that's why it makes my number one. So what did you think of our list? Did you agree? Did you disagree? Let us know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, do not forget to like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to click that bell icon so you can be notified about future videos just like this one. And while you're by the subscribe button, click that join button and become a Dark Knight fan. If you missed the previous ranking video, click the link above. And if you missed any of our other ranking videos, click this playlist and get caught up.